The Apache girl stumbled into the dusty town of Julian, California on a scorching August morning in 1878, her feet bleeding through worn moccasins and her dark eyes wild with exhaustion and fear. Ethan Vasquez looked up from shoeing a mare outside the livery stable, his hands freezing mid-motion, as he watched the young woman collapse against the wooden post of the general store across the rutted street. Her buckskin dress was torn at the shoulder, and her long black hair hung in tangled ropes down her back. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20 years old, and everything about her posture screamed of someone who had traveled far beyond the limits of human endurance. He set down his tools and crossed the street, aware of other townsfolk emerging from their establishments to stare. Julian was a small mining town nestled in the Cuyamaca Mountains, and while they occasionally saw Apache traders passing through, a young woman alone was unusual enough to draw attention. "Miss," Ethan said softly, crouching a few feet away so as not to startle her. "You hurt." Her head snapped up, and he found himself looking into eyes the color of obsidian, bright with intelligence despite the fatigue etched into her face. She said something rapid in a language he didn't understand, her voice hoarse and cracking. Ethan held up his hands to show he meant no harm. At 24, he had learned enough about reading people and horses to know when someone was running from something. The girl pushed herself more upright, and he noticed the way her hand went protectively to her side. "Water," he said slowly, making a drinking motion. "Let me get you water." He walked backward toward the pump, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. When he returned with a full dipper, she snatched it from his hands and drank so fast that water spilled down her chin. She handed it back and spoke again in that fluid, clicking language, gesturing behind her toward the mountains. Samuel Norton, the town's self-appointed mayor and owner of the largest mine, pushed through the gathering crowd. "What's all this commotion? Ethan, what have you got there?" "A girl who needs help," Ethan said firmly, standing between the older man and the young woman. "She's hurt and tired, probably hasn't eaten in days." "She's Apache," Norton said, his voice taking on a hard edge. "We don't need that kind of trouble here." "She's a person," Ethan countered. "And she's in trouble. I'm taking her to Doc Henderson." The girl's eyes darted between them, clearly understanding the confrontational tone even if she couldn't follow the words. When Ethan extended his hand to help her up, she hesitated for a long moment before accepting. Her palm was calloused and her grip surprisingly strong, but he could feel her trembling. Doc Henderson's office sat above the barber shop, and Ethan supported most of the girl's weight as they climbed the stairs. The doctor, a wizened man of 60 with kind eyes and steady hands, took one look at his new patient and immediately cleared his examination table. "What happened?" he asked Ethan. "Don't know. She doesn't speak English. Apache, I think." The doctor nodded and approached the girl carefully. "Let's take a look at that side you keep favoring, young lady." She backed away, speaking rapidly and shaking her head. Ethan noticed she kept glancing at the door as if calculating her chances of escape. "It's all right," he said gently, though he knew she couldn't understand. He pointed to the doctor, then to her side, then made a soothing gesture. "He wants to help." Perhaps it was the tone of his voice, or perhaps she simply had no strength left to fight, but she finally allowed the doctor to examine her. Henderson's face grew grim as he peeled back the torn buckskin to reveal a deep gash along her ribs. "This is infected," he muttered. "Needs cleaning and stitching. Ethan, hold her hands. This is going to hurt." The girl cried out when Henderson began cleaning the wound, a sound that made Ethan's chest tighten. He held her hands firmly but gently, murmuring nonsense words of comfort. She fixed her eyes on his face, and he saw tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. When it was over and the doctor was bandaging her ribs, she slumped forward, and Ethan caught her before she could fall. "She needs rest, food, and clean water," Henderson said. "And someone to watch over her for a few days. That infection could turn bad quick." "I'll do it," Ethan said without thinking. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? Norton won't be happy, and you know how some folks feel about the Apache." "I'm sure." Ethan's living quarters consisted of a small room behind the livery stable, sparse but clean. He laid the girl on his narrow bed and covered her with his spare blanket. She was already asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. He sat in the wooden chair by the door and watched her, wondering what circumstances had driven her to Julian. She slept for 16 hours straight. When she finally woke, the sun was streaming through the single window and Ethan was heating broth over his small stove. She sat up quickly, wincing at the pull on her stitches, and looked around the unfamiliar room with wide eyes. "Easy," Ethan said, turning to face her. "You're safe. You're in Julian in my room. The doctor fixed up your side." She stared at him, clearly not understanding, and touched the bandages at her ribs with tentative fingers. Then she looked at him and said something that might have been a question. Ethan pointed to himself. "Ethan." He repeated it slowly. "Ethan." She watched him carefully, then pointed to herself. "Zalia." The name came out like music, with emphasis on the second syllable. "Zalia," he repeated, and she nodded. It was a start. He brought her the broth and a piece of bread, and she ate with the careful control of someone who had been hungry too long. While she ate, he pointed to objects around the room, saying their names in English. She watched him with those intelligent dark eyes, sometimes repeating the words in a whisper. Over the next few days, they developed a routine. Ethan would work at the livery during the day, checking on Zalia between tasks. She grew stronger quickly, the resilience of youth and good health fighting off the infection. He brought her books with pictures, and she studied them with intense concentration. In the evenings, they would sit together, and he would teach her English words while she taught him Apache. Her language was complex and beautiful, full of sounds he struggled to reproduce. She would laugh when he got it wrong, a sound like water over stones, and patiently correct him. He learned that her name meant flowing water in her language. He learned the words for sun, moon, horse, bread, water, thank you, and please. "Why are you here?" he asked one evening, knowing she wouldn't fully understand but needing to try. He gestured to the mountains, to her, to Julian, her face clouded. She spoke in Apache slowly, as if hoping he might grasp some meaning. She used the word for soldiers, which he had learned, and made a gesture he interpreted as violence. She touched her chest, then made a walking motion with her fingers, then pointed to herself alone. "You ran," he said softly. "You ran from soldiers." She seemed to understand his tone, if not his exact words. She nodded and said something else, her voice breaking. Ethan saw tears in her eyes and, without thinking, reached out to touch her hand. She didn't pull away. A month passed. Zalia's wound healed into a pink scar, and her English improved rapidly. She had a gift for languages, picking up not just words but the rhythm and structure of English with impressive speed. Ethan found himself teaching her longer phrases, simple sentences, the building blocks of real conversation. "The sky is blue," she said one morning, pointing upward, her pronunciation careful but clear. "That's right," Ethan said, grinning. "Perfect, perfect," she repeated, testing the word. Then she pointed to him. "You are kind." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, made his chest feel tight. "You're a good student." She had moved from his bed to a pallet on the floor, insisting through gestures and broken English that she couldn't keep taking his bed. He had protested, but she was stubborn. At night, lying in the darkness with just the sound of her breathing across the room, Ethan found himself thinking about her more than he should. The way she concentrated when learning new words, her lips forming shapes they weren't used to. The way she smiled when she got something right. The grace in her movements as she grew stronger. He was falling in love with her, and the realization terrified him. The people of Julian had mixed reactions to Zalia's presence. Some, like Doc Henderson and Martha Chen, who ran the boarding house, treated her with kindness. Others, like Samuel Norton, made their displeasure known through cold stares and muttered comments. Ethan ignored them all, but he could see the way Zalia shrank under the hostile gazes. "Why do they look at me with anger?" she asked one evening. Her English was good enough now for real questions. Ethan sighed and set down the bridle he was mending. "Because you're Apache, because they're afraid and ignorant. My people and your people have fought," she said quietly. "Much blood, much death. I know, but that doesn't mean every Apache and every white person has to be enemies." She looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You are different from other white men I have seen." "How so?" "You see me, not just Apache. You see Zalia." The way she said it made his heart race. He wanted to tell her that he saw her, truly saw her, and that what he saw was beautiful and brave and brilliant. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, "Tell me about your family if you want to." Zalia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "My mother died when I was 12 summers. Sickness. My father was a warrior killed by soldiers when I was 16. I lived with my father's brother and his wife. They were good to me." "What happened? Why did you run?" Her hands twisted in her lap. "The soldiers came to our camp. They said we must move, go to the reservation in Arizona. My uncle said yes, we would go peaceful, but some of the young men were angry, they wanted to fight. One fired a rifle." She paused, her breathing uneven. "The soldiers fired back. Many people died. My aunt, my cousins. I ran into the mountains. I walked for many days alone. Then I came here." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest, not at her but at the senselessness of it all. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Zalia." "It is the way of things," she said, but he could hear the pain in her voice. "Your people want the land. My people want to stay free, so there is war. It doesn't have to be that way." "No." She looked at him with a sad smile. "Then tell me, Ethan Vasquez, how does it change?" He didn't have an answer for her. Instead, he moved to sit beside her on the floor and, after a moment's hesitation, put his arm around her shoulders. She stiffened briefly, then leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. They sat like that until the candle burned low, not speaking, just taking comfort in each other's presence. The night everything changed started like any other. Ethan was closing up the livery for the evening when 3 men rode in, their horses lathered and their expressions hard. He recognized them as some of Norton's mine workers, tough men who spent their wages on whiskey and cards. "Help you gentlemen?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Heard you got yourself an Apache squaw," the largest one said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "That true?" "I'm housing a woman who needed help," Ethan replied evenly. "That's all you need to know. Norton says she's trouble, says she's probably a spy for her people, planning to lead them back here to raid the town." Ethan almost laughed at the absurdity. "She's one woman, alone and injured. She's not a spy or a threat." "Maybe we should take a look at her ourselves," another man said, leering. "Make sure she's not dangerous." Something cold and dangerous settled in Ethan's chest. "You take one step toward my room and you'll regret it." The men exchanged glances. The leader shrugged. "Your funeral, Vasquez. But when the Apache come raiding, don't say we didn't warn you." They rode off, leaving Ethan with a sick feeling in his stomach. He hurried to his room and found Zalia cleaning the dishes from their evening meal. She looked up when he entered, her smile fading when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" He told her about the encounter, watching her face grow troubled. When he finished, she stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. "I bring danger to you," she said quietly. "I should leave." "No." The word came out more forcefully than he intended. "No, you're not leaving. Where would you go? Back to my people, to the reservation. Alone, across hundreds of miles. Zalia, that's suicide." She turned to face him, and he saw tears in her eyes. "I cannot stay here and make trouble for you. You have been kind to me, more than kind. You have given me safety, taught me your language, treated me like a person. I will not repay that by bringing danger to your door." Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. "Listen to me. I don't care what Norton or his men think. I don't care if the whole town disapproves. You're staying here where you're safe for as long as you want." "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" The truth burst out of him before he could stop it. "Because I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Zalia's eyes widened, and for a terrifying moment, Ethan thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then she squeezed his hands. "I do not know this word, love," she said slowly. "Not truly. But when I am with you, my heart feels different, light, happy. When you smile at me, I want to smile too. When you are gone, I wait for you to return. Is this love?" "Yes," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, that's exactly what it is." She reached up and touched his face, her palm soft against his cheek. "Then I think I love you too, Ethan Vasquez." He kissed her then, gentle and careful as if she might break. She kissed him back with a fierce tenderness that made his heart soar. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not just for safety. I want you to stay because this is where you belong, with me." "Your people will not accept this," Zalia said, though she didn't pull away from his embrace. "They will make trouble. Let them try." But trouble came anyway, faster than either of them expected. 2 days later, Ethan returned from delivering a horse to find his room ransacked and Zalia gone. The furniture was overturned, the window broken, and there were clear signs of a struggle. His blood ran cold. He tore through the town, demanding answers, but people either claimed ignorance or looked away. Finally, Martha Chen pulled him aside and whispered, "Norton's men took her. I saw them dragging her toward his mine about an hour ago. I'm sorry, Ethan, I'm so sorry." Rage unlike anything he had ever felt flooded through him. He went to the livery, saddled his fastest horse, and rode hard for Norton's mine in the hills above town. The sun was setting, painting the sky blood red. The mine entrance was guarded by 2 of Norton's men, but Ethan was past caring about subtlety. He rode straight at them, and when one raised a rifle, Ethan kicked it out of his hands and punched him hard enough to drop him. The second man backed away, hands up. "Where is she?" Ethan demanded. "Norton's office, but you can't just—" Ethan was already running. He found Norton in the wooden shack that served as his office, and Zalia was there too, tied to a chair, a bruise forming on her cheek. Norton stood over her with a smug expression. "Vasquez," Norton said. "Come to collect your property. Let her go. Now." "Can't do that. See, I've sent word to the army fort. Told them we've captured an Apache who might have information about recent raids. They're sending soldiers to collect her tomorrow." Ethan's vision went red. "She didn't have anything to do with any raids. She's been with me for 2 months. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, the army will sort it out." Ethan knew what that meant. At best, Zalia would be sent to a reservation. At worst, she would be hanged as a suspected hostile. Neither option was acceptable. He pulled his revolver and pointed it at Norton. "I said let her go." Norton's smug expression faded. "You're making a big mistake, Vasquez." "The only mistake I made was not doing this sooner. Untie her." Norton moved slowly, untying the ropes that bound Zalia's wrists. She immediately ran to Ethan's side, and he could see the fear in her eyes mixed with relief. He kept the gun trained on Norton as they backed toward the door. "You're finished in this town," Norton called after them. "You and your Apache whore both." Ethan almost turned back to put a bullet in him but forced himself to keep moving. Zalia needed to get away, and that was more important than his pride. They rode double on his horse, pushing the animal hard through the darkness. Ethan knew they needed to put distance between themselves and Julian before the soldiers arrived. But where could they go? California was filling up with settlers, and anti-Apache sentiment ran high everywhere. "Where are we going?" Zalia asked, her arms tight around his waist. "I don't know yet." "Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can be together." They rode through the night and into the next day, stopping only to rest the horse and drink from streams. Ethan's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. They couldn't keep running forever. They needed somewhere to settle, to build a life. On the second day, they came across a valley nestled between two ridges, green and lush with a creek running through it. It was isolated, miles from the nearest town, accessible only through a narrow pass. As they rode down into it, Ethan felt something shift inside him. "What do you think?" he asked Zalia. She looked around, her eyes taking in the tall grass, the cottonwood trees along the creek, the way the valley seemed to embrace them. "It is beautiful, like a secret place. We could stay here, build a cabin, start over." She twisted in the saddle to look at him. "Just us." "Just us, if that's what you want." For the first time since Norton's men had taken her, Zalia smiled. "Yes, that is what I want." They spent the next months building a life in their hidden valley. Ethan constructed a small cabin using timber from the surrounding hills, and Zalia used her knowledge of wild plants to establish a garden. They fished in the creek and hunted deer in the forest. It was hard work, but they were together, and that made everything worthwhile. As they worked side by side, their bond deepened. Ethan learned more Apache, becoming nearly fluent in the intimate language she had taught him. Zalia's English lost its hesitancy, becoming smooth and natural. They talked for hours by the fire at night, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. "My mother used to tell me that love was like a seed," Zalia said one evening, nestled against Ethan's side. "It needs the right soil, the right conditions to grow. But when it does grow, it becomes stronger than anything. Your mother was wise. She would have liked you. She always said the measure of a man was not in his words but in his actions. You have shown me through your actions that you are a good man." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "You make me want to be better than I am." Winter came, and they huddled together in their cabin, keeping the fire burning and telling each other stories to pass the long, dark nights. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the valley, and Ethan knew he wanted to make their bond permanent. He had no ring, but he crafted one from silver wire he had brought from Julian, working it carefully in the evenings when Zalia was occupied with other tasks. On the first warm day of spring, he led her to a spot by the creek where the wildflowers grew thickest. "Zalia," he said, taking her hands in his, "I know we don't have a preacher out here, and I know our people have different ways of doing things, but I want you to be my wife. I want to spend every day of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears shone in her eyes. "In my culture, marriage is different from yours. But yes, Ethan Vasquez, I will be your wife, in your way and in mine." He slipped the silver ring onto her finger, and she kissed him with a passion that made his knees weak. They married themselves there by the creek, speaking vows to each other in both English and Apache, with only the mountains and the sky as witnesses. That night, they made love for the first time in their cabin, and Ethan marveled at how perfectly they fit together, how every touch felt both brand new and familiar, as if they had been made for each other. A year passed in their hidden valley, and Zalia grew round with child. Ethan fussed over her constantly, worried about her health, about delivering the baby without a doctor. But Zalia laughed at his concerns. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him. "I will be fine, we will be fine." She was right. On a cool autumn evening, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy with Ethan's eyes and her black hair. They named him Daniel, and Ethan held his son with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the perfect miracle of him. "He is beautiful," Zalia whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Like his father." "Like his mother," Ethan corrected, kissing her forehead. They raised Daniel in their valley, teaching him both English and Apache, telling him stories from both cultures. He grew strong and curious, exploring every inch of their hidden home. 2 years later, Zalia gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, and their family felt complete. But isolation, while peaceful, had its challenges. When Daniel was 5 and Sarah 3, Ethan knew they needed to think about the children's futures. They needed access to supplies, to other people, to education and opportunity. "We should go to San Diego," Ethan suggested one evening. "It's a bigger city, more diverse. We could blend in better there." Zalia looked uncertain. "Will we be safe? Will the children be safe?" "I think so." San Diego is different from Julian. It's a port city with people from all over, and it's far enough from Apache territory that tensions aren't as high. They talked about it for weeks, weighing the risks and benefits. Finally, they decided to try. They packed up their belongings, said goodbye to their valley, and made the long journey to the coast. San Diego in 1884 was a bustling town of several thousand people, growing rapidly with the influx of settlers and traders. It was noisy and crowded after their years of isolation, but true to Ethan's word, it was also more accepting. The sight of a mixed couple with mixed children raised some eyebrows, but in a city with Chinese merchants, Mexican families, and people of all backgrounds, they were able to find their place. Ethan found work at a large stable near the waterfront, and his skill with horses quickly earned him a reputation and good wages. Zalia took in sewing, her skilled hands creating beautiful garments that wealthy ladies paid handsomely for. They rented a small house on the outskirts of town and enrolled Daniel in school. Life was good, but Ethan could tell that Zalia sometimes felt adrift. She missed her people, missed the connection to her heritage. One day, he came home to find her teaching Sarah a traditional Apache song, tears running down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "I worry that our children will forget where they come from," she said. "That Sarah and Daniel will only know your world, not mine." Ethan thought for a moment. "Then we teach them. Both worlds. We tell them the stories, teach them the language, keep the traditions alive. And when they're older, if they want to visit the Apache people, we'll find a way to make that happen safely." "You would do that?" "Zalia, your heritage is part of who you are, and our children are part of you. Of course I would do that." She kissed him, and he tasted salt from her tears. "I love you so much." "I love you too, always." They kept their promise. In their home, they spoke both English and Apache. Zalia taught the children the stories her mother had told her, the songs of her people, the traditional ways of preparing food and making tools. Ethan made sure they understood both sides of their heritage, never shying away from the hard truths about the conflicts between their peoples, but always emphasizing understanding and compassion. Years passed. Daniel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved books and learning. Sarah was more adventurous, always exploring the tide pools and cliffs around San Diego. Zalia's hair gained streaks of silver, and Ethan's face grew lined, but their love never dimmed. When Daniel was 15, he came to his parents with a question. "Father, Mother, I want to visit the Apache people. I want to see the reservation, meet my relatives if any are still alive. Will you help me?" Ethan and Zalia exchanged glances. They had known this day would come. Zalia took her son's hand. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will take you. It is time." The journey to the Apache reservation in Arizona was long and difficult, but they made it together as a family. Ethan was nervous about how they would be received, but Zalia held her head high as they rode into the reservation. They found distant cousins of Zalia's, people who had survived the conflicts and the forced relocations. There were tears and embraces, stories shared late into the night. The Apache people were living under difficult conditions, confined and controlled, but their spirit endured. Daniel and Sarah spent 2 weeks there, learning from the elders, participating in ceremonies, connecting with their roots. Ethan watched Zalia come alive in a way he hadn't seen in years, speaking her native language freely, dancing the traditional dances. He felt a mix of joy for her and sorrow for all she had lost. On their last night, an elder named Nate pulled Ethan aside. "You are the white man who saved my cousin's daughter," he said in careful English. "I helped her when she needed it," Ethan replied. "She saved me just as much." Nate studied him for a long moment. "You have honored her people by teaching your children our ways. That is a rare thing. I thank you." The old man's words stayed with Ethan long after they returned to San Diego. He had never thought of himself as doing anything special. He had simply loved Zalia and tried to give their children the best of both worlds. But seeing the gratitude in Nate's eyes, he understood that in a time of such division and pain, their love story was itself an act of resistance and hope. Back in San Diego, life continued. Daniel eventually became a teacher, determined to educate children of all backgrounds. Sarah married a kind Mexican fisherman and gave Ethan and Zalia 3 beautiful grandchildren. The years were kind to them, filled with family dinners, celebrations, and quiet moments together. On their 20th anniversary, Ethan took Zalia back to their hidden valley. It took them a week to make the journey, and they were both older and slower, but when they crested the ridge and looked down into that green secret place, it was like coming home. The cabin they had built was still standing, weathered but sound. They spent 3 days there, just the two of them, remembering their early days together. On the last evening, they sat by the creek where they had married themselves. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Staying with me?" "The life we've lived." Zalia looked at him with those same dark eyes that had captured his heart all those years ago. "Regret? No, never. You taught me that love can bridge any divide, that two people from different worlds can create something beautiful together. Our children, our grandchildren, they are living proof of that." "I was so afraid when I first saw you," Ethan admitted. "Afraid of how I felt, of what it meant. But loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing I've ever done." "You learned my words," Zalia said softly, echoing a thought she had shared before. "But more than that, you learned my heart. You saw past what I was supposed to be and loved who I actually was." "And you learned mine," Ethan said, taking her hand. "You taught me that love doesn't require us to be the same. It just requires us to see each other truly." They sat together as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple. Two people from different worlds who had built a life together against all odds, whose love had created a family, a legacy, a testament to the power of choosing understanding over fear. As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, Ethan held his wife close and thought about the scared, exhausted girl who had stumbled into Julian all those years ago. He thought about the journey they had taken together, the obstacles they had overcome, the love they had built word by word, moment by moment. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what? For trusting me, for staying, for loving me." She tilted her face up to kiss him. "Always, my heart. Always." They returned to San Diego renewed, their love reaffirmed. The following years brought more changes. Daniel married a fellow teacher and had children of his own. Sarah's family grew. Ethan and Zalia became the center of a large, diverse, loving family that reflected the best of both their heritages. When Ethan was 68 and Zalia 63, they threw a massive party to celebrate their 44th anniversary. The house and yard overflowed with children, grandchildren, friends from every walk of life. There were Apache songs and Spanish guitar, traditional American food and dishes Zalia had learned from her mother. It was chaotic and loud and perfect. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had gone home, Ethan and Zalia sat on their porch watching their family. Daniel was teaching his youngest daughter an Apache phrase while his wife looked on adoringly. Sarah was dancing with her husband, her laughter carrying on the ocean breeze. The grandchildren ran wild in the yard, speaking a mixture of English, Spanish, and Apache words. "Look at what we made," Zalia said, wonder in her voice. "Look at what our love created." Ethan pulled her close, marveling at how she still fit perfectly against his side after all these years. Not bad for a cowboy and an Apache girl who couldn't even speak to each other at first. "We learned," Zalia said. "We learned each other's words, and then we learned each other's hearts, and then we learned how to build a life together." "Best education I ever got," Ethan said, kissing her temple. As the evening wore on and the grandchildren were finally herded off to bed, Ethan and Zalia remained on the porch. The ocean whispered in the distance, and the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over them in their hidden valley all those years ago. "You remember when I asked you to marry me," Ethan said. "By the creek with the wildflowers." "I remember everything," Zalia replied. "Every moment with you is written on my heart." "I meant what I said then, and I mean it even more now. You are my heart, Zalia. Every beat belongs to you." She took his weathered hand in hers and squeezed. "And you are mine. From that first day when you gave me water and helped me when you had no reason to, you have been my home." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had learned long ago that they didn't need words to communicate, that love spoke in the quiet moments just as loudly as the grand gestures. More years passed, gentler now. Ethan's hair went fully white, and his hands developed arthritis that made working with horses difficult. Zalia's eyesight dimmed, making her intricate sewing work challenging. But they adapted, as they always had, finding new ways to be useful and engaged with the world. They took particular joy in their great-grandchildren, a new generation that carried forward the blended heritage they had created. These children grew up in a changing world, one where the divisions that had once seemed so insurmountable were slowly, painfully being questioned and challenged. Daniel's granddaughter, named Zalia after her great-grandmother, showed particular interest in her Apache heritage. At 12 years old, she came to her great-grandparents with a school assignment. "I have to write about my family history," young Zalia said. "Will you tell me your story, how you met?" Ethan and Zalia exchanged smiles. They had told this story before to their children and grandchildren, but it never got old. "I arrived in Julian speaking only Apache," Zalia began, her voice still strong despite her years. "I was hurt and afraid and alone. Your great-grandfather found me and helped me. He learned my words," she continued, "the language of my people. He was patient and kind. And slowly, as he learned my words, I learned his heart." Young Zalia scribbled notes furiously. Were people mean to you because you were different? Yes, Ethan said honestly. Many people were. They didn't understand that love doesn't see race or culture, it just sees the person. But you didn't let them stop you. No, Zalia said firmly. We didn't, because what we had was too precious to give up because other people were afraid. The girl looked up from her notes, her eyes shining. I think your story is beautiful. I hope I find a love like that someday. You will, Ethan assured her. Just remember to see people for who they are, not what others tell you they should be. And when you find someone whose heart speaks to yours, hold on tight and never let go. After young Zalia left with her notes and hugs, Ethan turned to his wife. We did good, didn't we? We did very good, she confirmed. We created something that will outlast us. A family built on love and respect and understanding. That's a legacy to be proud of. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring bloomed, summer blazed, autumn cooled, and winter quieted the land. Through it all, Ethan and Zalia remained together, their love a constant in a changing world. When Ethan was 73, his health began to fail. His heart, the same heart that had loved Zalia so fiercely for nearly 50 years, grew weak and irregular. The doctors said there was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. Zalia refused to leave his side. She sat by his bed, holding his hand, speaking to him in both English and Apache, reminding him of their life together. You remember the valley? She asked him one afternoon. Our secret place where we were married. How could I forget? Ethan's voice was weak, but his smile was strong. Best day of my life. Mine too. You gave me a home when I had lost everything. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel safe again. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up each morning with joy. You gave me everything, Zalia. You taught me what it means to truly see another person, to love without reservation, to build something beautiful out of broken pieces. She leaned forward and kissed him gently. We built it together, and it will continue after we're gone. Our children, our grandchildren, all those babies we held and stories we told, will live on through them. Promise me something, Ethan said, gripping her hand with what strength he had left. Promise me you'll be happy, that you won't spend whatever time you have left grieving. Live, Zalia. For both of us. Tears streamed down her face. How can I be happy without you, the same way we were happy together, by choosing it, by finding joy in small things, by loving our family and telling our story? Promise me. I promise, she whispered, but you have to promise me something too. Anything. Promise me that when it's my time, you'll be waiting for me. Whatever comes next, promise we'll find each other again. Ethan smiled, and for a moment he looked young again, like the 24-year-old cowboy who had given water to a desperate Apache girl. I'll find you. In this life or the next, I'll always find you. He passed quietly 3 days later, with Zalia holding his hand and their entire family gathered around. His last words were in Apache, the language he had learned for love of her. My heart is yours, always. Zalia kept her promise. She grieved, but she didn't let grief consume her. She threw herself into her family, telling stories of Ethan to anyone who would listen. She taught Apache to her great-grandchildren, preserving the language and culture she had once feared would be lost. She lived deliberately and joyfully, honoring Ethan's memory by continuing the work they had started together. She lived for 7 more years, years filled with love and laughter, and the satisfaction of seeing their legacy flourish. When her own health began to fail, she faced it with the same courage she had shown all her life. On her last day, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Ethan had created, she smiled and spoke in Apache, then translated for those who didn't understand. I see him. He's waiting for me just like he promised. Young Zalia, now 19 and studying to be a teacher like her grandfather, held her great-grandmother's hand. "What do you see?" "The valley," the old woman whispered. "Our valley with the wildflowers by the creek." And Ethan, young and strong, reaching out his hand for me. "It's time to go home." She closed her eyes with a smile on her face and passed peacefully, leaving behind a family that spanned cultures and generations, all united by the love story of a cowboy and an Apache girl who had learned each other's words and hearts. Her funeral was held in San Diego, but her ashes, along with Ethan's, were scattered in their hidden valley by their children and grandchildren. As the family stood by the creek where two young people had once married themselves, speaking vows in two languages, Daniel spoke. "They showed us that love is stronger than fear, that understanding is more powerful than hatred, that two people willing to learn from each other can build something that lasts forever. They were just one man and one woman, but they changed the world for all of us who came after them." Sarah added, "They taught us that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about commitment, about seeing the best in each other even when the world tells you to see the worst." Young Zalia, who would go on to become a renowned educator and advocate for indigenous rights, spoke last. "Great-grandmother told me once that love was like a seed that needed the right conditions to grow. She and great-grandfather planted that seed together, and look at what grew from it. All of us. Dozens of people from different backgrounds, different beliefs, united by the choice two people made to love each other despite everything working against them." As the sun set over the valley, painting it in the same golds and purples it had shown all those years ago, the family stood together in silence. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they began to sing an old Apache song that Zalia had taught them all, their voices rising together into the evening air. The valley held their song, just as it had once held two people learning to speak the language of love. The creek continued its eternal flow. The wildflowers bloomed and faded with the seasons, and the mountains stood watch over it all, guardians of a love story that had transcended every boundary and created something beautiful and lasting. In San Diego, the house that Ethan and Zalia had filled with love and laughter continued to host family gatherings for generations. The silver ring Ethan had crafted became a family heirloom, passed down through the years. The stories lived on, told and retold, growing richer with each telling. And in a small valley hidden between two ridges, accessible only through a narrow pass, the wind whispered through the cottonwood trees and the wildflowers bloomed eternal by the creek, a secret place where two worlds had met and become one, where a cowboy had learned Apache words and an Apache girl had learned his heart, and where love had proven stronger than every force arrayed against it. Their story became legend in the family, then truth, then something more than both, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, understanding over ignorance, connection over division. It was a story that began with a desperate girl stumbling into a dusty town, and ended with generations of people living proof that love, true love, can change the world one heart at a time. The legacy of Ethan Vasquez and Zalia lived on in every descendant who chose to see past differences, in every child who learned two languages and honored two heritages, in every couple who loved across boundaries that others said were insurmountable. It lived on in the choices people made every day to extend kindness to strangers, to learn from those different from themselves, to build bridges instead of walls. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, a cowboy and an Apache girl walked hand in hand through a valley of wildflowers, finally able to rest in the love they had fought so hard to protect, their hearts beating in perfect unison for all eternity. their story complete, their love triumphant, their legacy assured. The sun set on their story, but the light they created would shine on forever through the lives they had touched and the love they had shared. They had arrived as strangers speaking different languages, but they had left as one, having learned the only language that truly matters, the language of the heart.